son, where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
Welcome back to the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast, and I'm super grateful to have the one, the only, my best friend, Sam Salem, joining us on the pod. All right. Yeah, cheers, buddy. Here we are. We're doing it. You know what? I even made a special drink in honor of you. I made myself a mocha latte.
A mocha latte. Very good. Good for you.
You turned me on to those. I'd never thought to put hot chocolate mix into a latte. It was genius.
Same thing for me. I wasn't doing it. Someone did it, and I got into it. I got hooked. Coffee.
Exactly, Kafivi. So how you doing, buddy? You know, it's been a long time of us having crazy chats. And here, you're probably the better one at documenting them because you probably have more of them documented.
Yeah. What was that? Going back to, oh man, we're going to date ourselves. We're only going to do this from here on out, like 03, 04, 05.
Yep. 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And you were always the better documentarian of the group. I feel like you probably hold the treasure trove of pictures and like, not staged videos, just like videos of things happening.
I do need to go back and dig out some of those because I remember at the time it was just like, we were just going a mile a minute into different things. And I was just like, why not we didn't have microphones or like tape recorders, anything like that. It was just like, well, you know what? We're going to get older too. Why not start a video on that little Minolta camera right at the beginning of digital cameras? And
it was cutting edge.
It would record for like, I don't know, 45 minutes maybe, and then the battery would die.
And what was the resolution? It couldn't even have been like 1080, do you think?
Oh, no way. Because remember, the high def was a thing. Like, I remember getting my first high def TV and thinking like, oh, this is 1080. It's so cool. COD is going to be so awesome on this thing. And it was just like, the deaths were just so much cooler.
Yeah. Yeah, they really gets you with the shading,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But no, it's funny you bring that up because I do need to go back and dig some of that out because some of the combos we would go through are just like
it's a treasure trove, I'm sure.
Yeah. And how many things haven't necessarily changed over that same time span? It's just.
Well, I remember at one point you had like dug through during one of your computer shifts, you had dug through and you'd found some videos. It was maybe like 10 years after the fact. Mm-hmm. And I remember us listening to them and just laughing about them. But I mean, it's really not that far off. So really, you're the one who started the podcast. I'm just continuing it. If it really seems to have played out that way. So
I might have gathered a few pieces of wood that you have then built into a pod, but I wouldn't say that at all.
Yeah. I've pissed an acid stream of piss onto those flames and turned it into what it is now. And even back then, I remember you talking about our topic today, the USS Scorpion. But I guess my first question would be, what happened first? Did like you see the Clancy movies that were like odes to, and then you wanted to find out more, so you researched like the true stories it was based off of? Or
right.
I can't remember which came first. If you knew of the thing first and then always loved the movies because they were, whispering to that.
So I think what got me was, so we were just barely alive when the Soviet Union and the Soviet states started to fall apart, Berlin Wall, and it was always confusing to me, like, when you're yay tall and you're growing up and you're like, how does the world work? The sun comes up, all that basic shit. And trying to understand, like, why were they our enemy? Why did we think negatively of these people? And then I started to learn about, the Cold War, and why did they call it the Cold War? Why, and it's just a little bit at a time, I would start to understand what exactly it was. And somewhere in there, like, I'm sure you or so many people, our age that are at least casually into that subject, for Red October, which is playing on TV, and watching that and trying to fit that story, which is a story, but at the same time borrows from historical events in different ways to make that story. And, submarines they're pretty cool.
They're pretty fucking sick.
The whole idea that you can just build something that's like, by the time I was really getting into it, I think, the Kursk, which we may or may not get into, sank in like 300 feet of water, not that deep. But when they were talking about it on TV, it's like, this thing is almost 2 football fields long and 80 meters wide or something like that. And it's just this massive ship that if it were even just on the surface, it would be huge. It would be crazy. It would be so intricate. And it's designed to stay underwater, basically, until you run out of food. That's the limiting factor to nuclear submarines is, how much food do you have?
It's one of the limiting factors.
Well, but
your point is completely accurate. I mean, it trips me out too to think about this. This is the 60s. Mm-hmm. They had this fucking sub in the 60s, a nuclear powered submarine in the 60s. And it's not like shocking in the sense that we had entered the atomic era and started deploying nuclear power in a bunch of different ways. But sometimes it's funny to me to think back, like other things that occurred in the 60s, and we were able to create a nuclear powered submarine, But, and correct me, you might know more about this than I do, but the concept of a nuclear submarine is the same thing as like a nuclear power plant. It's not necessarily harnessing energy directly from decomposing uranium or something like that. It's taking a radioactive material and then it boiling water, and then effectively you just having limitless steam energy.
Exactly. Yeah,
okay, so it's the same thing.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but
neither am I. But that's in the Cro-Magnon understanding of what's going on there. We'll just go with that,
Yeah.
But so, at what point did, like, you and I are both the kind of people where we'll get into something and then, we'll consume as much as we can, and then we'll go about our lives, and then at some point later in the future, we'll do another deep dive. Like, what was the point at which you were like fully invested in this story? Like, what was the point at which you were down to start reading some very specific books or articles or?
I think it was basically the first time that I had heard about it. I can't say exactly when it was, but it was, probably somewhere around college era. I started to just sort of, in college, you kind of grab a subject and you take it as far as you're able to make it go. And if it's a subject that you're not going to school for, then you have less mentors or people that you can bounce ideas off of. So I could only go so far, but it was just wild to me that we had built so many of these boats and we had actually lost some. And so when I started to research is a pretty loose term. When I started to read about
Well, no, we're taking it already beyond most people's,
It's fair. But when I think of research, I immediately just think of, well,
academics.
How much do I even have access to?
Sure.
At the end of the day, with the military, as I've seen you get in with on other pods, most of the time, almost all of the time, 99.99% of the time, the only stuff we know is because we're allowed to know it, or
right?
it was
It's what
allowed
they
to be
told us.
published. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, but no, I just thought about. I just was fascinated that there was a military branch that was specific to submarines. I had read at one point that you have to be able to do a certain sinus clear. It may not be sinus, but some sort of technique that as you go deeper, it's like the same thing when your ears pop on an airplane.
Sure.
You have to be able to clear the air that is stuck in your sinuses. If you can't do that, you can't be a submariner. The idea that they would rather die than be caught, I think, is wild. There's no celebrity about it. It's just hardcore, dedicated, do your job or we die sometimes. And sometimes you die anyway.
Yeah.
And I just, the mentality of that was just wild to me, and the technology that went with it. And as I started to learn more about it, the other part of it that got me was the idea that, like, the nuclear triad, right? That we have land-based missiles, we have airplanes in the air that can bomb you at any moment, and then we have the submarines. So there's
launch ICBMs. Yeah.
There's three ways that we can, kill you, Soviets, if you decide to do a sneak attack.
At all. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you want to pound out all the missiles on the ground? Well, we got planes in the sky 24/7. You might get some of the subs.
Well, dude, honestly, you got a good point too. Mad is one of my favorite things about the Cold War.
Yeah.
Like what ends the hostility is like, all right, it's cool. If you blow us up, we'll blow you up, and everything else. If someone presses the button, we're all pressing the button.
Yep.
We good? Okay, cool. Like that. It's just hilarious to me that that's the compromise we can. That's the compromise. That's international politics at its finest, right there.
Well, and that's I want to save that point for when we get to if we do the K-129, because the one of the theories of the plan by that captain was to, for a strike, false flag it, make it look like it was, a different country. Then we're, again, not to borrow from Tom Clancy, but a storyline from The Sum of All Fears, that false flag attack. And now we don't know what's going on, and, chaos, basically. So.
Well, I think, you bring up Tom Clancy again. I think he's done a very good job of, like, taking a skeleton story and creating this whole, alternate universe where sometimes the shit doesn't go as planned, and it's a little more fun. I don't think it's as glamorous as the Tom Clancy stories, but he gets a lot of the psychology, in my opinion. He gets the behaviors of these people down pretty well because, I don't know. As much as we want to say, like, Russia wasn't a threat, like, there's some fucking Russians who did not like America.
Oh, hell
There's
yeah.
plenty of Russians who would have been okay with fucking touch. And just like there are some Americans in some fucking bunker somewhere who were telling them, we gotta hit the button.
Yep.
And it wasn't for, like, a few cooler, calmer heads who, like, could extrapolate what that would mean for life on this planet.
Hardliners on both sides. 100%.
Yeah, it was serious, as jokey as the Cold War can be. It was serious. People died. It was serious fucking business. That was a serious war. It was a Cold War, but there was a whole, like, especially in the spy world and stuff. But that's a whole other. We can go on a whole other fucking tangent
For sure.
with that.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. You know, I love stories. I love a good story, and I had probably seen Hunt for Red October, any of the other Tom Clancy novels that would loosely touch on any of the Cold War era spy stuff before I even made the connection that maybe some of it was real. I think you were probably the person who told me, like, no, this is a fun story that Tom Clancy made, but the real story is just as fucking intriguing and could be a movie in and of itself. But
for sure.
I guess let's dig into it a little bit. We've been talking a lot about how we found the story, and we talked about the story at all. So I first just want to give a quick shout out to a few videos. Now, Sam, you said you had watched this one. Could you just give us a brief synopsis of what this one was about?
This is a good one, and I was trying to find this one before, so I apologize to this guy if he ever catches onto this. But this one just like floored me. He has a theory that is probably a bit more than a theory in all actuality, that we knew that there was something wrong with the sub before its reported arrival date or coming home date. And the part that got me about this video was him talking about how he had talked to people who were there at the docks, at the naval base, and just how all of a sudden any ship that was operational, they just started going out. They just went out to sea and went hard charging for something. And then a few days later, when Scorpion was supposed to have came back or arrived, obviously then they go through the whole, we don't know where it is. We haven't had contact. And the whole story that they have to tell everybody, and that they have to kind of, the show they have to put on, when behind the scenes they knew that something was wrong. And if I remember correctly, I haven't seen this video in a bit, but he had talked to people that were there at the dock who had knowledge also that something had gone wrong, and they needed to send all their ships out to see if that there was anything that could be done or try to locate the wreckage, essentially.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting as I was reading and watching all this stuff is like all the similarities kind of between the Titan, the submersible that just went down recently, and how the Navy knew. Navy fucking knew that thing was done before the search party was launched, and they just let it go on. But again, for the purposes of not disclosing the sensors that captured the implosions or whatever, they kept it quiet. They wanted to control the narrative, and absolutely during the Cold War, that was,
it's a warfare tactic.
Yeah, 100%, and controlling the narrative in the sense that if people really understood, like, well, I guess we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm not going to spoil too much of this here. Next video was this guy's the Atomic Cafes. He has a couple videos on Thresher, Scorpion, a couple other subs. I think he actually has one on K129. Bunch of really good videos. It's a little dry, but it's got all the details, and it breaks it down so that even Cro-Magnon people can understand the complexity of this situation. And then the one that I kind of took notes from was this one from Dark Seas. Yep. Nope, we don't want to watch that. From Dark Seas, and Dark Seas is one of many channels that this guy has, that he just makes a bunch of military themed and technology themed. He's got a bunch of subsidiary channels, each talking about specific things. Anyways, Dark Seas, a lot of good stuff on that channel. Yeah, I guess let's go over some bullet points. I don't know if you have taken any notes, but I guess if we can kind of, what is the first part of this story? Like the thing they create this sub and then.
Well, this was. I don't have notes in front of me, so it's hard to know quite where to start. But this was a sub that was definitely at the end. I don't think anybody would question was in need of repair. I can't remember exactly where one of the crewmen got off, but I think one of the crew members on the last patrol before it disappeared actually said, "This is incredibly unsafe. I went off this boat over when it was in Europe." I want to say
I've got his name. Hang on.
Do you have that
here somewhere? Yeah. Dan Rogers.
Okay.
I think Dan Rogers.
And that's, we talked about the submariner mentality to, toughness is unquestioned, dedication unquestioned, at least in my opinion. And, there's got to be a brotherhood there. And he just, it's not like they kept that part quiet, at least, and maybe in the moment they did, but, it's not like he was just, I'm sure there's a scenario in which it was the case, but it would be hard for me to think somebody who thought internally enough that this is unsafe was not talking to people on the boat,
right?
Saying this was unsafe. And I think they said in many of the letters that were coming and going that many people felt it was unsafe.
Yeah. Sure.
And it was on the heels of USS Thresher, the first submarine lost by the Navy, and its unsafe conditions they had redone, how they were maintaining those boats to not let another accident happen. And they had kind of
they really did a good job there, didn't they?
Maybe cut some corners because they needed boats on patrol. And that's kind of the other thing that gets me, not specific to Scorpion, but about submarines. It's there's that old adage, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. And I don't think anywhere ever has that been, at least through to today, has that been more true than with military submarines, because we're talking about the peak technological warship.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know what's more expensive than a submarine. Maybe the F-35. Those are pretty expensive and pretty badass. Yeah. But and these submarines, their job, as we're going to talk about, is to trail enemy submarines and monitor enemy submarines. And when you're out there in the ocean, your closest human compatriot is the enemy outside of your boat. And I think that just adds to sort of the aura and the mystery of submarines and the people who operate them.
Well, definitely. And I think I think a lot of people don't understand how much submarines are used for spying. Like, they're a super useful spying utility. So not only spying on the enemy's navy, enemy submarines, but really like getting good pictures, getting deep behind enemy lines untraceably, and getting good pictures and data to this is really kind of before we've gone full hog on deploying surveillance satellites. I'm sure we had some, but nothing like the shit that we have today that we're launching up every other week.
Right.
But that is an interesting point, the camaraderie of like, I remember it from other stories of like showdowns between Russian and American subs. It's like, I see you, I'm not going to blow you up, but I might. there's like this strange bond that they have in the same way that spies from America had like these strange relationships with Russian spies just because they were spying on each other.
They're in the same game.
Yeah, they're in the same game. But okay, yeah. So let's unpack a little bit from here. I think we can there's a few bullet points on here I think that are super relevant. And ultimately what this boils down to is I think the military would have liked to continue the lie of, maybe it was Russia. We don't know. We're investigating it, but maybe it was Russia. But ultimately what this is fucking incompetence. Like after the Thresher, they create a whole program, SubSafe. And the SubSafe program is to ensure that no more subs are lost because of and it has these insane overhaul regulations.
Yes.
And they fucking just, when it's the Scorpion's turn, because they needed subs out on the water, they're like, well, they pass an executive order and they're like, we're gonna stay it this time. We're gonna allow it just this once because we really need to. But when it comes back, it's gonna full on overhaul. And I think that's tougher for the military to own up to. They would never admittedly own up to that because it just makes them look weak and stupid and silly.
For sure.
Anyways, May 68 is when that submarine disappeared, but that submarine came into existence really, I guess, in August 1960, or in August 1960, it deployed. It came into existence December 19th, 1959. So it gets deployed. It's under heavy use, and then it gets parked at Charleston, where it's supposed to go in an overhaul, right? Yeah, that was the first time it was supposed to have an overhaul. Then they got interrupted. They sent it out, and then it's like, all right, you got to come back, and we got to actually do that overhaul. Again, they're spying on some stuff here. What does this say? Yeah,
the Russian Sea.
They were able to film, this was a useful tool. And again, we didn't have a ton of these subs. So it makes sense as to why they were just deploying it, because like you were saying, your only limit is food, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As long as the thing was getting overhauled, the only real limit to how long it could stay out and how far it could go is how much food you got on there. So 1966, as a part of the Navy's SubSafe program, which was launched after the loss of the USS Thresher, the Scorpion went under extensive routine testing and overhaul. This process painstakingly went over every component and utilized ultrasound to verify the continued integrity of the vessel and its components. Okay, here's the thing. SubSafe quadrupled overhaul times because they realized that whatever they were doing wasn't enough. And they came up with this obnoxious thing. And if they had adhered to it, ironically, they probably wouldn't have had this problem. And I'm assuming since they haven't lost another one, they're probably adhering to it now.
Yeah.
But anyways, it quadrupled the overhaul times. So the chief of naval operations authorized a so-called experimental accelerated procedure where safety checks and the installation of improved components were bypassed. Cool. So right around this time, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I think about these things. It's like I feel silly doing this. I almost want to come to the defense of these people, even though I'm sure, they would step on anybody's throat just to get another leg up or a star or whatever. But you were talking about new boats, a new technology, a submarine, which isn't super new because they had them in World War I, but the idea that they could stay underwater, that we could put nuclear missiles.
Yeah.
It totally transforms, submarines, their purpose used to be, ride along even in World War II, they would not be underwater that long. They would be going along the surface. And then when they would see a boat, they'd go under and they'd just hang out there. They very often would not continue going. They would just dump down and sit. They'd shoot a torpedo and they'd come back up. and now they're like the entire operational usefulness of a submarine is it has to stay underwater. It cannot run on the surface. If you're running on the surface, you're not a submarine anymore. You're not doing your job. You're not, fulfilling the design of the boat. And not only are you supposed to be underwater, you're supposed to be way underwater.
Yeah, way underwater.
Way underwater. And you're not really like, yeah, you might have some torpedoes if you happen to, get into a little squabble. But now your main purpose is, if we tell you to shoot a nuclear missile, that is your purpose. Like,
yeah.
So in some ways, when you design something brand new like that, it's like, how are you supposed to know how much maintenance this thing needs? How are you supposed to know what kind of, it's almost like you have to develop these maintenance programs and these testing procedures, even though it's got to be mostly the same.
Here's what's dumb. They did that. They created a whole thing after they lost the first one. They were like, we need to reanalyze how we're dealing with this. And they create this whole new thing. And then at the first opportunity to adhere to it, they don't.
Right.
That's the silly part here.
Yep.
And I get it at this point in time. Dude, you're totally right. The submarine was the war platform of the ocean. Cruisers, they don't carry ICBMs. Aircraft carriers, they don't carry ICBMs.
No.
They might have a couple planes that they could dump one on, but probably not. It's probably a bomber that's floating up in the sky 24/7, or a team of bombers.
Much more threatening.
It was the war platform of the sea, and it was just as crucial to them as any land-based systems or air-based systems. And it effectively becomes, this sub in particular, effectively becomes their goddamn command center. And really, nuclear submarines have become that. They stay underwater for forever. They can go for forever. They are the sea-based warfare platform.
Yep.
I imagine that. I imagine even if they're not participating in what's going on at the surface, they're probably helping direct it with the prime view and the subversive nature of being submerged.
Especially, and I know this is farther down the line, but especially today when we have, big, thick internet cables that are just running all across the oceans, all over. I mean, that's what most of it anymore is now. I'm pretty sure is subs go
policing the lines.
Yeah. Well, or in ours, I assume Russia's case I've read about. You just
tap in.
You just go next to that fiber and you put some tech next to it, or you just
siphon off some data.
Just, we're just doing a little spying. No problem. Nothing to see here.
Just checking in. Just seeing what's going on in here.
Hello.
Right. So we'll get back here to the topic here. So SubSafe again. They have this fucking fail-safe procedure that they decide to bypass. Apparently, repair crews were also being overworked and forced to do work with subpar equipment, spare parts, and without any detailed inspection or instruction. And there was something that he said in this video, but like even down to like the metal that they were using to weld, like anything that needed rewelding, the metal they were using to do that was like subpar shit metal. The people, like so many people, it was so bad that the Scorpion was forced to maintain a diving limit of 110 meters, which is nothing for a sub standard. It's nothing. And then I guess because they A-OK the shitty express overhaul, it returns to operational status 7 months later, but it didn't receive a SubSafe certification. And apparently this is one of only 4 subs to fail.
And that's what I remember reading that and hearing on, I think it was the Dark Seas video that I watched. Okay, it didn't get SubSafe, but we're still going to push it out.
It can't perform anywhere near what it's supposed to perform, but we need it out there. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like it's, and again, this is fucking bureaucracy, dude. The generals, some general was above another general, was just barking orders down that we need this to happen, and some guy just to get that promotion, some guy just to say he got the job done, he okayed this, and like this, this is just tale as old as time. This shit just never gets old. Okay, so they deploy in late '67. They deploy the thing to Mediterranean Sea, and it's got a new commander, Francis Slattery, and then it heads to a naval base in Rota, Spain, and it's in poor condition despite having just overgone the overhaul, and it forces 2 crew members to leave.
Now, I think these. I remember reading about these 2, and I think these 2 are actually after Dan Rogers. I think Dan Rogers left before this, and I can't remember exactly what it was.
I've got a note at the very beginning. At the beginning of that video, he does like a summary of the moments before the cataclysm, and then he goes back through the history. Very, very good videos. I can't recommend Dark Docs enough. But an electrician's mate on the sub, Dan Rogers, requested a transfer, stating, "I didn't know it was going to sink, but I was absolutely uptight after having been on there and seeing the things I'd seen. I was just unable to deal with going to sea again on the Scorpion." And this is May of '68 that this happens. Anyway, so let me get back down here. Nice, you got that highlighted. Okay, so supposedly suffering from mechanical breakdowns, a leak on the propeller shaft, a worrying oil leakage in the hydraulic system, leaks of poisonous freon, unstable control surfaces, and even had a fire caused by the trash disposal unit. And that is also one thing that some people theorize as the actual cause of the demise of this thing is a trash disposal unit that created an electrical fire and because it was a known issue. Anyways, my notes: the fucked vessel departs Rota, headed to the Azores to surveil Soviet ships, and then it was supposed to head back to Norfolk. So 12 a.m. on May 21st, 1968, Slattery transmitted a confirmation that they had located a Soviet sub, and the message reached a Navy comm station in Nea Makri, Greece, where it was forwarded to comm sublant. And then the Scorpion closed in on the Soviet sub at 15 knots and 110 meters with the instruction, begin surveillance of the Soviets. When the sub never arrived back in Norfolk, the search effort began. So now here's where it really diverts. And this is the intrigue of the story.
Yes.
Did they actually send that message, or did the military just say that they sent that message to plant the seed?
Mm-hmm.
Either scenario, that being the last received transmission, that's very important to our government, because it at least plants the seed of like, was this a showdown? It probably wasn't a showdown. Maybe they saw that sub, maybe they surveilled it. Mm-hmm. This shit was fucked. This thing was not operating in peak conditions. And when you're in a self-contained metal, oval underneath the water in the open ocean, you're fucking doomed.
Yeah.
There's no, it's like it's the equivalent of being in a fucking spaceship.
Yeah.
That's how isolated and away from help you are in case something goes wrong. So here's where the story diverges. The Navy begins a search employing dynamic Bayesian statistical methods to optimize the search patterns. And I guess that's how they analyze how a craft would settle on the ocean floor. That's like a very well-known science for people that recover lost craft in the ocean. They can, I'm sure it has something to do with like the patterns of water in that area and how soil and sediment moves. And they can say if the thing fell down at this rate and hit the floor over this amount of time, it would end up over here. That I'm butchering that, but that is a real thing, and we've been able to do that for a very long time. In the '60s, we understood that for sure. So, and then supposedly there is a recording that captured 15 acoustic events over 190 seconds, which appeared to originate from an underwater explosion. And then all 99 men in the Scorpion are declared presumed lost, and they even removed the vessel's name from the Navy's vessel register on June 5th. But the question is, when did the Navy know? And you're probably right. I would be inclined to believe that as soon as they lost contact with that thing, considering of how valuable of an asset it was, they would have deployed, regardless of if they knew it was their fault or if they thought it was Russia. They would have sent that out. It's a lot of money sinking in the ocean. That's a lot of nuclear warheads we don't want to fucking lose track of.
Yeah.
You know? So that makes total sense. And I guess maybe you can kind of speak to, having watched that other video of that guy who, after the fact, has proposed theory, who like has actually done the research here, where I guess maybe here, let me also say, and did you watch the video of the wreckage?
I didn't watch a video specific to the wreckage. I know that it was a Bob Ballard, right? Bob Ballard, who they gave some money to, or funded, so that he was going to go look for the Titanic. And the government was like, well, why don't you also go see if you can get some pictures of this, since you're going to be in that area anyway. And I believe those are the main photos, or they may be the only photos that have been released, but if you were to Google USS Scorpion and you see the photos of it on the seabed, those are, I believe, from that expedition.
Yeah, those are legit. Like, that's absolutely the story that happened for sure.
Yeah.
I got one note down here with Dan Rogers again. Mm-hmm. So basically, after the fact, everyone is the military conducts investigation. Precise cause of the incident could not be determined, and then a report was made public that stated the certain cause of the loss of the Scorpion cannot be ascertained from the evidence now available. Brilliant fucking sidestepping bullshit. So the theory proposed by Vice Admiral Arnold Schrade and Dan Rogers claims the sub sank due to a faulty trash disposal unit. The malfunction would have allowed a flood of seawater into the batteries, producing hydrogen gas that could have incapacitated the crew. And a series of events ultimately would have led to an explosion at the center of the sub. So those are the guys that were on it. Those are the guys that were like, we were there and this is what we saw and here's what we think happened. Mm-hmm. Another one of the theories is that charging batteries at periscope depth and how the Scorpion might have suffered a hydrogen explosion because of a faulty battery charging mechanism. The charging process could have channeled excessive energy into individual cells, releasing enough hydrogen gas to cause an explosion. This was a common issue in U.S. subs at this time. So there were also several books, All Hands Down and Red Star Rogue and Scorpion Down, that alleged the Scorpion was sunk by a Soviet sub or torpedo launched by a helicopter. Those theories apparently are not that good, but again, like it's plausible if the idea that they were tailing a Soviet sub is true. If
they're juicy. They're juicy.
Yeah,
theories,
they're very juicy.
But how much?
It's probably incompetence. It's probably just incompetence.
It's the simplest.
That story is way cooler, but yeah, the simplest is Occam's razor. Is that the thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that definitely in this scenario. Decades later, it's revealed the Navy had its own theory in which defective Mark 37 torpedo warhead had detonated, and the 330-pound mine could have been accidentally launched or jettisoned, and finding no other target in the area, circled back to strike the Scorpion. That was also a known problem of those torpedoes, but that honestly, the Navy knew immediately what happened, and decades later they were, you know what I mean? It's just like anyways, the Mark 37 batteries were prone to overheating or combusting due to their the Mark 37 torpedo batteries were prone to overheating or combusting due to their silver zinc batteries. And then final note here about Dan Rogers. Dan Rogers teams up with a journalist from the Houston Chronicle and together dig up documents that pointed directly towards the detrimental state of the ship. Letters from the crew also, this is what you were talking about. Letters from the crew also confirm the conditions. And due to its inclusion in a secretive project, the only about bypassing overhauls, what? Its necessary maintenance needs had been cut off, not to mention the reduced budget. Basically, they just got overworked. Yep. That's what these guys said. Got overworked. The bare bones maintenance that they had said needs to be done on these overhauls was deliberately being overlooked on this one because they just wanted it out there. And the official cause has still never been determined. The Navy never came up with a definitive answer of what happened here, which is bullshit. Right. They know, they just don't want to say it, and that's why I say it's incompetence. Because if it was actually an attack, decades later, they would have been happy to say that.
Yeah.
They would have been happy to be like, this is what went down. But because they don't want to pick what happened, it's probably, they know what the deal is. But the official cause is never determined, like I was saying, but the Navy never again rushed an overhaul procedure after this loss and revised the Mark 37's design. They also routinely survey this wreck for radioactive leakage. Aren't there like a few other rogue places where there are like bum nukes that we monitor too, or like was there another another secretive operation later after this thing had sank where like they tried to go retrieve the warheads from it? I remember you telling me about, I don't know if it dovetails on this or other stories, but
I'm trying to think of a U.S. one, and
am I thinking of like a Russian story?
I think you're thinking of the Russian story, which feeds into the more fun explanation that a Russian sub was involved somehow, because that's the one thing we haven't touched on is in 1968, 4 nuclear subs were lost in that year. One by us, one by Russia, one by France, and I put up my 4th finger too soon. The 4th one by Israel. And the Russian
Israel?
one,
really? Damn.
Yeah. And but the two, not to diminish what happened to all these people involved, but the two best stories are clearly the Russian loss and the U.S. loss. And the Russian loss occurred before Scorpion, K-129, I want to say. And
you're at, that's it, right?
And there were maybe some credible, maybe not credible insinuations that one of our subs was involved in the loss of the K-129, because shortly after the 129 was lost, one of our subs that was in that area or wasn't in that area,
right?
Shortly after that went for extensive repairs. And I'm pretty sure there's a decent documentary on this, but there was a whole elaborate ploy with like Howard Hughes to build a ship that was for mining purposes. And the CIA was like, well, actually, no, we want you to go bring this sub up. And the sub that they tried to bring up.
That's
the one.
Thinking.
That's the 129. And
that's 129. Okay.
Yeah. And so that one's a little, how that one was lost. There's not as much known as the Scorpion, obviously, because even today, Soviets, Russians, they're
not talking about that shit.
No. Except to say that it was our fault.
Yeah, exactly. Not to us. They're only using that as propaganda for sure.
Yeah. I don't know how much you want to get into that one, but basically the crux of that one is that one went down. We were monitoring those waters. I believe it was like west or northwest of Hawaii. I may have that totally wrong. Anyway, where they went looking for it was very far away from where our underwater hydro microphones picked up the implosion. And so that was part of how we were able to say, oh no, we're just over here to drill. There's nothing over here but drilling with this ship that was really meant to raise their submarine. And I mean, the implications of getting their boat and understanding the technology that they had, and the reverse engineering of all their stuff was just totally crucial to. It would have been the same as like a MiG pilot defecting and landing at a Air Force base. We would immediately take that apart and understand what its limitations are, what it's good at, so that we can develop better tactics in theater against it.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy. I mean, that one, like, we could probably do a whole other episode on.
We definitely could.
We probably should.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, and it, like, it was far away from where they thought it went down, but where was that thing? The Bayesian, was the Bayesian statistical methods. So like when any craft crashes in the ocean, the current is going to take it away from where it like crashes, right? Once it's on the ground, it's also going to continue to move. The current's going to continue to move it, but it's going to slow down based on what it's up against, or if it like hits rocks, or like, again, there's the reason that we got subs mapping the ocean floor and shit. It's like, they have analyzed other wrecks that they've come across and can kind of, with a fair degree of accuracy, say if this went down over here at this time, theoretically, based on the movement of these waters and the material that it lands in at the bottom of the ocean, here's where it should be. So it's completely possible that it enough time had passed and it had moved far enough to where it was like, oh, plausible deniability. Oh, we're not there doing that. That's way over there. We're over here. But in reality, like, it's moved hundreds of miles since it crashed, and the currents have just slowly taken this massive thing. It's creepy too, because on the ocean floor, like, shit leaves a trail. Like, a lot of these craft, like, they find them, and then the trail goes right back to just scrapes along the ocean floor. That's what I mean to say. Like, whatever statistical methods they have for doing that, they long ago mastered that. That's there. Bro, any airplane that's crashed in the ocean, as we know, as has been discussed, they're filming everything. They've got microphones all over the ocean.
Yep.
We've got satellites all over. We're videotaping at very insanely high resolutions anything that happens on the surface, and to a lesser extent, but still to an incredible extent, what's happening on the ocean floor. When planes crash, we know where they go. We just don't say that we know where they go, because we can't say that we have technology that's doing this. Every country's doing it, and we all play this game like, oh, we're not doing that.
No, we don't know, but do you know?
Yeah, but do you know?
Don't know? But I thought you had the thing.
But we might know.
I
And
heard
occasionally,
it was over there.
occasionally it leaks out. I want to say one of the passenger planes that got, or at least maybe somebody pleaded to the security state to be like, can you please show us what we know you're filming? Can you please show us? But in the case of the submersible, the Titan, the Navy monitored that, and ultimately it leaks out that they had the recording of that well before the relief effort is launched.
Yeah,
It's just another prime example. Like, and there's a few other examples I'm not thinking of, but where either after the fact the government has said, well, we can confirm this. We're not telling you how we can confirm this, but we can confirm this. Or somebody has made the plea to be like, can you please?
I forgot. I wanted to make a note of that on that point. I'm pretty sure that I had read with the USS Scorpion that was the first time the government had used the phrase, we can neither confirm nor deny.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. I thought that was hilarious.
Incompetence.
Yes.
Guaranteed. Like the fact that is the event that coined the phrase. that's that's like the admission of guilt, in my opinion. Because when they say that, it means that they're confirmed.
It's mea culpa, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I just want to toss this up here. Ian Brown said, hey, fire.
What's up, buddy?
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for tuning in, bub. It doesn't surprise me. Like, none of this, I don't expect the military to all of a sudden adapt the new policy where they're going to be transparent about classified information. I'm not stupid. Okay.
Right.
But I think there's a level of humility that every layer of the American government needs to start embracing if they want any sympathy from the global stage. Like, really. And it's not to say other countries are going to do it. We're going to have to lead by example there. And we probably won't. But that's like these.
I'm glad you said that.
I'm a realist. All right. I'm a realist here. Okay. But that's never going to happen, because when you admit your faults, it makes your military look weak.
Yes.
When you admit your institution's faults from the perspective of the people in charge, it makes us look weak. It makes us look stupid. And it does. And honestly, it's because they are. Yeah. It's pretty obvious that you don't even follow the rules that you set for yourself. And when you don't follow them, bad shit happens. This is not something that is new to the 60s. The Scorpion was just another addition to the long list of bureaucratic failings. The Soviet Union's list is just as long. From my perspective, I guess this is what I'm saying. This level of secrecy, this constant state of paranoia that those people live in, breeds a situation where we can never have. There's never going to be peace. No. There's never going to be peace, because there's always going to be some goddamn warmonger in a bunker who's willing to use any means to justify an end.
It's Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, no, dude. It is infuriating to me that more people haven't seen the movie. I've been telling so many people, I feel like recently, that's the reality, and 100%. That was Kubrick's way then, at that time, to have his hilarious, biting, sarcastic interpretation of it. And yes, it's a characterized version, but it ain't too far off.
It's not that far off at all.
One of the funny, I didn't realize this until I was way older, but one of the most fucked elements of that, I did a podcast a couple weeks ago with my buddy about project Operation Paperclip. Mm-hmm. The scientist that comes in, it took me becoming like somewhat intelligent 20-year-old to realize that was an Operation Paperclip Nazi. And the joke that Kubrick is making there is that we folded in these Nazis. We gave them very powerful positions, advisory roles to important people. Mm-hmm. And they embedded themselves and entrenched themselves in ways that allowed them to continue their sadistic behavior under the fucking red, white, and blue. The Soviets, ironically, all the Nazis that they took, once they milked them for all the information they were worth, they kicked them back to Germany.
That's crazy.
It was a very, but then again, Russia paid a much higher toll in World War II. Millions of fucking Russians died.
Yeah, for sure.
Fighting the Nazis. Like there was zero sympathy. America, how we enter it is kind of sus, now that we can look at the history a little bit further out. Yep. But really we entered it for different reasons entirely, and we didn't necessarily we took a hit, but we didn't take the hit that other people took. It makes sense why Russia behaved that way and America was a little more lenient to Nazis, because millions of American soldiers didn't die. Right. Maybe then the government would have taken the idea of folding in Nazis into the system with a little more, with a grain of salt. But the fuck do I know, But that Strangelove, It's super accurate, and whether they're in a bunker under land or they're in a submarine undersea, like that story, not sarcastically, has taken place many times. Where we really should go into K-129, and maybe even we do another one where we talk about the standoff, like the moment during the Cold War where we were seconds away. Like, it is verified in the history books of the military. Like, we were seconds away, and because of one cool-headed person, one reasonable individual, they staved off at least one attempt at World War. I can't remember what story it is. You know.
Is it? Well, I can't remember his name, but I do know that I had read a couple of different times about it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we were depth charging a submarine, a Soviet submarine.
Yep.
And it was becoming disabled to a certain degree. And I believe on their boats, the captains, this is crazy, but had the authority to launch nuclear weapons. And the captain wanted to do it, and the political officer on the boat would not. And that's how he could have said okay, and the missiles would have launched, and we probably wouldn't be here.
That would have been it.
That would have been it.
That would have been it.
But and who's to say if that's just a propaganda story, or who's to say if he said okay, let's do it, and then their missiles barely get out of the boat because it's Soviet tech and it's been being depth charged, and who's to say? But definitely that story of that guy saying no, we're not going to do this, and really in a sort of a heroic moment. Like, obviously we can't understand what it's like to be in a sub when explosions are going on either side of us and we're way underwater, but that's happening. You're scared for your life. You have to be. And you say, no, we're not gonna end the world today.
Start this process right now. Yeah. It's crazy. And again, like, I'm sure there are tons of other moments like that, but that's one I know that it's least heavily documented. But anyways, let's wrap it up. We've reached the hour mark. I want to thank you, Sam, for coming on the show and unpacking the story of the Scorpion. And I guess the next one we do, we'll pick another one of the subs and we'll just fucking explode it. No pun intended. Yikes. Stay on. I'm going to do the outro, but stay on. We'll chat here afterwards. Subscribe. Please like and subscribe. We're 99. We just need one more subscribe and we'll be at 100. But that's enough of my crying about it. That's it. See you later.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast.
This isn't what I want.
With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva.
That's obnoxious.
Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva.
Literally no one cares.
For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business, or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod.
When will this end?
Thank you for listening. Now get back to work.
Move it along.